The squirrel was magic!
Beware your human heart. This is a Diabolical Index for July 8th, 2019, where the pages of the Uncanny reside. This is Corey Dawson, as always, back in Moreland Manor. And I have to say today, it's pretty awesome. I'm coming off of missing a day. Just all kinds of circumstantial jazz. But something pretty cool arrived in the mail that I wanted to kind of start off everything with. As you can see, I'm wearing a pretty noticeable logo on my chest today instead of a Diabolical Index. It is Running Scared Motion Pictures. I mentioned them in the past. And Josh DeForge comes out every once in a while. And I come home and I see this really fat bubble envelope, which is almost always fun. You're hardly ever receiving a bill on those things. So I bring it in as it's just packed tight with something, and I was just so excited because I hadn't ordered anything, and I knew it was coming from his neck in the woods. And earlier he, you know how it is with like Christmas presents and birthday and stuff. You kind of
We gonna plug it back in.
you Did I have any audio at all?
Yeah, you were just sounding like Darth Vader.
Oh, Darth Vader. Okay, that's all right. But anyway, he had kind of hit me with one of those questions like, "Hey, this has no meaning, and don't pay much attention to this, but what size shirt do you wear?" So I was like, "Ooh, that's a provocative question." So I kind of tried to play dumb. I tried to forget about it, and next thing I knew, I came in the door and had this gigantic package, and I got this Running Scared Motion Pictures logo, flat out represent. Josh DeForge and the boys. I think their latest short It's called He Is No Man. So definitely go to their place and check that out. But that is not all, I have to say. I don't think even Emily is here yet. She's going to be so disappointed. But I'm not going to go slow because we don't really have the time. Huh? Is she back? All right. Emily's here. Okay, Emily, you are especially, I didn't want you to miss this. You're going to be pumped about this. So let me see here. So I got the t-shirt, and packed inside also there were things lurking in there. And let's see, is that 1 and 2? 1 and 3. He gave me also, give me a book, Cam. He gave me the Rock and Roll Horror Zine number 1 and 3. Looking good? Back up? Okay. So, check this out. And it's got these awesomely heretical and look at that. It's got all the information there. But anyone who hasn't kind of experienced the zine culture, it's alive and well. A lot of people thought it was dead, but it's basically these do-it-yourself zines. People would get the photocopies done and kind of tack them together, staple them together, do all the artwork, collage it, and photocopy it. And it was so awesome. I was so happy to see these because this is just about as old school as it gets. And it's got weird fiction, horror. There's some bizarro stuff in here, and that's awesome. What's that guy's name? I think he wants to stay. Oh, Ben Fitz. Okay. Ben Fitz, editor and creator of the Rock and Roll Horror Zine. So, basically, I'm going to put this up here again for his information. Hopefully, this is still in operation. It's difficult to tell with some of these more do-it-yourself things how long they last because they're not going the easy way. It's not the easy route to get these things done. You have to do them by hand. They're expensive. You're not putting them out in digital format and stuff. Although he does have a blog spot. He's got a blog. So definitely check that out. Totally awesome. Doomgoat666 at gmail.com. Rock and Roll Horror Zine blogspot.com. Check it out. And I haven't got a chance to read any of this stuff yet. So blast and a half. So the other thing was, here we go again. The Drip Drop Prophet and Other Stories by Austin James. It says, this is a sad, weird, mystic Pixar cartoon for pre-disturbed adults. The kind of heartfelt crazy people read Bizarro for. Yeast of my yeast, crust of my crust. I have no idea what's going on here. But it looks like all kinds of everything. But The Drip Drop Prof and Other Stories by Austin James. So, I thought the surprises were over when I was looking through this stuff. And then, shining out from under all of this stuff, I find not one, but 2 Goosebumps, Reader Beware, You Choose the Scare, Choose Your Own Adventures. Couldn't believe my eyes, especially since the faithful and indomitable Andrew had already gotten a whole stack of these things, and how Josh DeForge in his infinite wisdom knew that we didn't have Trapped in Batwing Hall and Under the Magician's Spell. And one of these actually even came from Kmart, if you can believe it. I thought those were all doomed. But, yeah, so these Goosebumps are going to end up in the lineup at some point. They'll be part of the poll. So let's see. Oh, my gosh. I don't know if I'll be able to... I might just pick it myself. We shall see. So, I'm going to put them on at the non-duns. So there you go. So this is episode number 15. Entry episode. I'm not sure. I think there were a few people who were irritated that I didn't go straight to the non-entry choose your own adventure, but I have to keep everything in series, otherwise it'll all get screwed up. Because there are sometimes I do the special interviews and stuff, or episodes with all, like episode X, or episode blue, episode red, whatever. Sometimes I don't do them by numbers, so if I don't keep the numbers in order and do the non-entries and entries how they're supposed to be, things can get screwed up. Uh-oh, Justin Lentz from the Oh Yeah Dig It podcast is in the house. Awesome. Oh yeah, Mr. Gully. No Civil War reenactment. It's I've just found that it's it works for me. These are actually a little bit sparse since it's so damn hot and humid. I kind of went a little wild with the clippers earlier because I was just tired of it. I had brushed everything out to see just how far it had gotten, and I don't know. I look like some kind of Russian tyrant. So, the prodigious knapsack. Hey, that's eyes peeled, man. This is always here. I can't even remember where I got this thing. It's just so floppy and wonderful. Floppy and wonderful. I'm sure going to jump on that with both feet. But, anyways, tonight I actually kind of switched up my title for tonight, and I decided to do what I had planned to do last time. I decided to wait on that because I've got a couple of things coming up that it's going to take a little more research. I was going to go into it not quite as prepared as I would like to. And I decided, I discovered this book for tonight, so I decided to put them both on hold and delve a little bit deeper because they're going to be extensive topics. So, hey Brian, what's up, man? I'm not so sure I've seen you around before, but it's great to have you. And I don't know about that American History X. I'm not sure. Is he talking about the fat guy? I guess that's possible. That's all right. Huh? Did he have mutton chops and that thing? Oh well. I'm not quite that big, I hope. Jeez. But that guy's actually lost a lot of weight too. Yeah. Can't remember his name, but he was in everything for a minute. As well as what was that show with Jason Lee in it? I don't know. About the guy who was dealing with karma. Earl. My name is Earl. Yeah. I think he was he was in Wolf of Wall Street. So anyway, I'm not trying to get into movies. We do need another. Since Heckles and Horror has gone on to bigger and better things, we may need a horror podcast again. Or a movie podcast, that is. So I don't know. Sign up. Enlist if you dare in the Magic Squirrel Network Army. Whatever. Anyways. So, yeah. I don't want to talk too much about what those topics were because I'm going to be going into a lot of stuff. And if I start with it, then it'll just be an abbreviated version, and that's why I kind of changed it up to begin with. So, and I posted all kinds of art, different cover art for this, because the one I had gotten after I saw the others, all the art that was online, I pretty much figured out that for whatever reason, the edition I had picked had the least best art of all that stuff. So I posted all the other stuff, and then I saved the not mediocre. I'm not gonna say mediocre, but in comparison to the other stuff, it's not quite as tantalizing. But tonight I want to talk about Brendan Daneen's The Chrysalis. Give me a book, Cam. So it was really interesting. I had no idea when I picked this up that Daneen is actually a comic guy. I think that he had done the Groot children's book. There was a Groot children's book, and he has worked for Marvel in other capacities, and he's part of his own comics group, I believe, named Scout Comics, and he's done some interesting stuff. It's one of those things I kind of went back to the old school stuff I started way back at the beginning, which was I wanted to go in because I was trying to divert away from the more extensive topic. I wanted to go into the library and try to find something that just kind of like struck me. Like I didn't want to do a whole lot of thinking about it. I wanted to kind of jump out at me. And when I saw the Chrysalis, it kind of struck me as always when, and I might end up doing this is a topic at some point too, but you kind of have something to go on, except for just kind of like happenstance and things. But personally, myself, I think that a book benefits from not being classified. If you don't have something on it that says horror, like plastered on the side of it, or sci-fi on the spine, suspense, mystery, all that type of stuff, I think that you'll find, and I've definitely found, that if you look through just the plain run-of-the-mill fiction area in your library, in whatever store you go to, hopefully local, hopefully non-corporate, if you can manage it, hopefully you'll go through the fiction section, straight fiction. Sometimes when you go to a shop that really has its act together, there will be people who kind of sniff out the classifications in fiction that some would say they should have had and don't. But in my opinion, I'm a big fan of looking through fiction and finding things that are unclassified, that are just in fiction, that just say a novel. Because, and I've been finding a lot more lately. It makes me wonder if there's some sort of renaissance or maybe a push for it, where you'll see something in the run-of-the-mill fiction area that is just about as horror as you could possibly get. And that's what I really, really look out for. And this was one of them. Hadn't heard anything about it. On the back, it's got all kinds of accolades, and so far as I can tell, I don't really agree with almost all of them. I think when it comes to these blurbs and when it comes to these classifications, they're so hell-bent on finding something that it's like, and they're so interested in finding what box to put it in and what file to name it under and all that kind of stuff. I think that they do it a disservice. And in fact, the funny part is, once I was done, which I got to the end. I actually got to the end of the book just today because I had kind of switched gears earlier in the week with all this stuff and, not making it on Monday. I kind of had other stuff on my mind. So I hadn't, I realized I didn't have enough meat for the other topic. I wanted to get more into it. So I picked something out. And after I ended it, I looked back again at the blurbs on the back, and I just realized that they all completely missed, to me, what is the most obvious comparison I can make, which is why I was kind of like, when I named the episode, I called it Themes and Echo, because this couldn't remind me more of another story that I liked better, which isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes you can find elements to one that the other one doesn't capture, and it just so happens that the other one happened, or at least was created, and hopefully still thrives. It's difficult to find, but I'll get into that a little bit later. I'm not a gigantic fan, like I said, with the blurbs. I don't like to compare things to other things if I can manage it. In this case, I think that it was kind of a glaring omission from all this stuff. It just seems like everywhere I look, when it comes to strange fiction, it just seems like everyone wants to tag that David Lynch name on there. I didn't get that from this at all. Not at all. It says Cronenberg-esque body horror with a genuine heart. I wouldn't call it Cronenberg-esque body horror. I think that I would, if anything, I think there is a Cronenbergian tone to this, but it's so slight and it's so specific that I definitely wouldn't do a generalization of the entire story for it. But be that as it may. The Chrysalis by Brendan Daneen is definitely, it's a page turner mostly because of the relationship. In my case, it just so happens that the relationship that is going on in this book and the couple involved, it really reminds me of, it's kind of a slight variation on my current situation.
You know, they're just in the they're kind of in the aftermath of a major change in like occupation, their where they're living, just the whole situation. It reminds me a whole lot of a lot of things that are going on in my life. So to me, I found that much more striking than the other stuff. And of course, like it takes place in New York and later New Jersey, where I can't really compete with that. I mean, I live in Rising Sun, Indiana, so I can't really I can't comment to any sort of similarity with that. But when it comes to kind of being ousted from your home, ended up in a new place quickly, you don't have a whole lot of time, but you end up accidentally kind of getting into a place that you would have liked to, and then you find out that you need to be careful what you wish for because it might not be as awesome as all that. And I don't know, just new possibilities, new pitfalls, all that kind of stuff. It ends up really hitting home for me. But as I was kind of going over everything for tonight, and I was thinking it over, and usually even when I kind of like approach a book, I have some sort of idea of some glaring themes, some glaring comparisons, things that run through it, common threads. And with this, I don't want to say that it's clunky, because it isn't clunky. It's well done. The people are believable. The situations are believable. Yes, Mr. Gully, absolutely. Home of the Shiners. Almost got a Shiner the other day. I actually caught an elbow, flying elbow to the eyeball. But, yeah, Rising Sun, Indiana. Home of the Shiners. But with this one, with the Chrysalis, I found myself kind of saying, well, yes, it's got an inkling of this, and yeah, it's got an inkling of this, and it's got an inkling of that, and it seemed like to me that I don't think, and not to say that you have to have an ironclad theme throughout everything, you can have a kind of like a tonal, idea, and maybe, have some sort of sub theme or whatever, and it doesn't have to be ironclad. It can be malleable. It can move around a bit, and especially I haven't run into a book like this for a long time where sort of on the same page the narrator, and I think that it's not to say it's a groundbreaking thing. I don't think that's something that they did that no one else has done. For whatever reason, I rarely see it, though, or at least I rarely pick up on it. Where I guess it's an omniscient narrator, but for some reason, sometimes it's omniscient of the wife, and sometimes it's omniscient of the husband in the same paragraph. So it's every once in a great while, there's kind of like this jarring shift that happens where you kind of have to plug in the thoughts and feelings and kind of like what the attributes and elements of another character. You have to shift them real fast, like just after, the end of a sentence when a period happens. Not to say that you won't know who's talking, but you just have to kind of like plug that in real quick, and it can be, slightly jarring. But am I talking to the wrong camera?
Yeah, you are. I'm messing with something.
Okay, so am I frontwards now?
You're fine. You're on this side one.
Okay. What happened to the damn numbers?
I don't know where I put them.
Find them. What? You got a whole stack of them.
I don't know where they're at. It's a mess in here.
So Biggie's number 1 and Smalley's number 2, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I'm on Biggie?
You're on the smaller one.
Okay.
Silver.
I'm telling you. There we go. Silver and Boston Blackie. Sorry, I have to take a sip here. Usually with my beard, I might have like a little bit of moisture in there that keeps me lubed. And got rid of it. This is going to take a while to get used to now, because I had that big old fur ball on my face, and now I have to get used to this again. And I'm sure in some ways I look like a baby now, but So the story. Tom Decker, it was easy to remember. I mean, of course, it doesn't. He doesn't align with any of these characters or anything like that. But instantly, I thought of Blade Runner. It's not spelled the same, but it's just kind of like that. That intonation, memory, or whatever, but it's not the same thing. He is I guess you wouldn't say he's out of work because he does work at a bartender, but it's kind of a fly-by-night, not necessarily under the table, but it's not what you call a 9-to-5 job. And he's an artist as well, kind of like a rock star type. He's got shoulder length hair and tattoos and stuff, and he manages to bring home some bacon, but it's mostly party time. And one of the things when I was talking about kind of like theme that kind of gets picked up and then dropped and then reminded and then almost emphasized is the subject of like addiction, which I think that if you kind of, or if the story would have kept up with it, it would have been it could have totally, freelance. Robin, there you go. But only at one place. So I mean, I don't know what you'd call that, but just like a weekend bartender. But with the theme of addiction, I mean, I guess you could say if there was an underlying, okay, it's kind of hard to describe because it's such a convenient theme. When everything starts getting put together, it becomes like a strong theme. Like you can totally see it being there. It's not hackneyed. There isn't any cliche to having it that way because like a lot of people experience addiction in a lot of different ways, and I think that it's for a lot of people. I'd say that it's definitely a relatable thing, and so it's weird when it gets brought up and then kind of side shifted, kind of like knocked out of position by something else. And it's really weird because it almost really obviously and really kind of like loudly gets brought back into focus a few times, where it almost seems like, and who knows what the author's thinking, but to me, it seems like, oh wait, I forgot addiction, right? So wait, I got to get back into there real fast, and so that doesn't make them amateurish or anything. But knowing about kind of like the comics background and stuff, it almost makes me wonder if the long form story put in this way, maybe it's something you have to work into. But his wife, Jenny, on the other hand, is a corporate trainer. She goes to these corporate guys and physically trains them for that mind-body connection that you need to be a properly powerful and ruthless business person. So she's kind of got it. She's got it made slightly. There's a little bit of a curve when it comes to the income bracket and all that kind of jazz. So they kind of see her as a tool, and she does put up with a lot of ogling at work and stuff like that. But she also, ends up going to the bar and hammering it home just as well as he does, and that's how they met. She ended up going to the bar with some of the corporate stooges, and they ended up meeting that way. So when you meet these two, they're hungover, which also comes into play as well. They do experience a lot of hangovers, despite that being a big drinking being a big part of everything. Ogres and Onions. That should be a restaurant. You two should open a restaurant called Ogres and Onions. But yeah, there are definitely layers to this. But I'd say instead of layers, I'd almost say shreds piled on top of each other. So, everything's going as normal lives, normal mishaps. And as it goes along, you notice that it's not like I said, it's not a bad thing. But I guess that it's something that I've just seen done with so much more finesse that it kind of sticks out to me. And this is going to sound like a bad review. This is going to sound like a bad analysis. But just for whatever reason, the introduction of the characters seemed to me thorough. You're definitely introduced to the characters, but it comes off as such exposition sometimes, or it's done through dialogue, but the dialogue is still saying it instead of having an object refer to someone or whatever. It just seems like the characters are introduced in a way that it just seems loud. That's the only definition I can come up with, or the only description I can come up with, is they're introduced loudly by the dialogue and explained by the omniscient narrator. So it's not a bad thing. I've just seen it done it more smoothly. So you definitely know who the characters are, what their relationships are. It's clear that it's more of a metropolitan environment, because unlike good old Rising Sun, it's not quite as pale everywhere you look. It's not quite as status quo everywhere you look. It does come through, to me anyway, that it did seem in some parts like there was a checklist to get everyone they could possibly think of, or he could possibly think of, in there, which is totally fine. This is the 21st century. But like I say, when you're bringing characters in so loudly, in at least the way that was done in this novel, and to be honest, I found out about the comic connection, but I don't know if this is his first novel. Yeah, Night Groove. So he did he also did Ninth Circle. Okay, so yeah, Brendan Daneen did the Ninth Circle, which I was also interested in reading, because it kind of has that Carter beats the devil, kind of like stage magician ends up crossing paths with like the supernatural. It kind of had that flavor to at least the cover. I didn't read the synopsis of the book, but I'm definitely interested in his other stuff too. But as it goes along, they basically find that they have been they're the victims of rent, where their rent just all of a sudden, clear blue sky, and ended up getting tripled. And they've already had a rent increase within the last year. It went up $100. So they are in bad straits. So basically, Jenny's sister Victoria is very, very well to do, and it's kind of the sister that the parents pay attention to and like, and Tom, his best friend, is a salesman of like the highest caliber. I think that he said that he makes like 8 figures or something like that. So basically, are these people who are surrounded by people who love them, but are doing much better than they are. So there tends to be this magnetic pull and this repulsion of class strata that's going on with them as well, where they don't want to take charity, but they're in dire straits, so they're going to have to, and they do kind of like by fits and starts end up getting injected into this higher echelon that they might not have been used to. And it kind of starts with Victoria, Jenny's sister, when she finds out that they've basically, in one way or another, have had this weird soft eviction type of thing. She ends up kind of getting on the horn and finding one of her sorority sisters from whatever Ivy League college she went to, and they set up this last minute realtor who ends up showing them all over the place, and for whatever reason their budget level puts them in places that are, they end up having to point out to her that, the place stinks of cat piss, or there's like burnout mattresses in the backyard, and basically it becomes this conversation with this kind of glassy-eyed, plastic-toothed realtor that if they had better budgets, they'd find better places. So they should kind of they should appreciate what they get, I guess. And yeah, definitely with me, this story, like everything was really hitting home. All of it made sense to me except for the rampant alcoholism. But with them, they're kind of like functioning alcoholics. They do drink too much, and, you know, she gets on him for smoking too much and all this kind of stuff. But you don't see that. Crushing their lives. And the addictive personality is definitely explained. But when they finally, Chelsea, who is their realtor, finally says, well, I guess there is this one house, and that's kind of like in the story where as the plot thickens, you know, where it's like, uh-oh, the last house, what's going to happen, you know, is it on the left, right? So they end up going to this house, and it's more than they could have ever, it's like the money pit moment. It's a better house than they ever could have imagined. It's huge, and it's, you know, I don't know if it's Victorian or not, but it's an older house. And Chelsea leads them inside, and it's like a hoarder's dream in there. There are like TVs everywhere, and there are big packs of books and garbage bags and everything. And you can't tell if someone left in a hurry or if they were in there so long that stuff just kind of started getting piled to the ceiling. Hey, Angela, what's up? Hey, hi, Ben. I think I forgot to say hi to Ben, too. I guess when I say hi to Robin, I'm talking about the unit. But, so, they go inside, and they're looking around, and she's kind of showing them all the little nooks and crannies, and there are, like, secret doors, and there are, like, these little servant stairs that go behind rooms and then, like, down into the kitchen, which I'm also very familiar with because there's a large house in Rising Sun called Loring House that I spent a pretty decent chunk of my young adult life in. So I'm used to those types of eccentricities of houses. And so they're looking around, they're finding out about all this stuff, and they say, well, you know, the girls are going to go throughout the house, and Tom, why don't you see what's in the basement? So this is where the story begins, really. I mean, there's something that happens in the prologue that I think it might be best if I don't quite talk about. But I don't think it's too much to say that it's basically what happened in the house before the Deckards got there. So Tom goes into the basement, and the first thing that happens is he's just overcome with his dizziness. You know, like all of his synapses just seem to be firing at once, and he's smelling dust, and he's, you know, sneezing and coughing, and he's wondering, you know, how long the place, like, has it ever, you know, like leaked? Has there flooded and there's been like standing water? You know, is it stagnancy down there? Is it messing with him? Is he, you know, does he need a mask to go down there because he's feeling some effects? The dampness is just kind of like creeping over his body. And when he gets down on the ground, it's just a slab of, you know, cement, and he doesn't see anything except for this gigantic figure standing against the wall across the room. And he reacts pretty well to it. I mean, maybe it's a byproduct of living in New York. I'm not sure. But personally, I used to have this big coat tree, and I had this big coat that I'd put on there and a hat and stuff, and it was my first apartment. When I would come in there and the moonlight would be shining on it, it looked like this gigantic person just standing in there waiting for me when I got home. And so I think I would have started just slightly, but for some reason he barely reacts. And he gets out his phone, and he says, you know, like there are fluorescent lights kind of crisscrossing down there, and the light won't reach. It's almost as if it's being kind of like sucked in and destroyed by this singularity or whatever in the corner of the room. And so he tries to bring his phone up with a light, and he drops his phone. Of course, he drops his phone. And it was interesting. There are a lot of things in this story that they're not those convenient things that they do with characters in fictional stories sometimes, where you're just like, oh, that's why didn't they shut that door behind them, or why didn't they fix the tablecloth because someone's going to notice they were there. It's one of those things where it's a little element that I thought was interesting, especially now. I think the people could relate to it. Where he drops his phone and instantly he's like, oh, I hope I didn't crack my screen. So it's something that doesn't necessarily need to be there, especially in the suspenseful moment. But I thought it was real. So he picks it up and he shines the light over, and it turns out that it's an old refrigerator. Which, I don't know. You're in a basement. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to be afraid of the basement. I used to be afraid of things that went and bumped down there, even in the bright daylight. So I can't fault him for thinking that a refrigerator is a person, but it's kind of weird that he wasn't more freaked out. But it may have been due to what he finds in the basement, where he starts walking around and he's not necessarily sifting through everything, but he can feel and hear almost like a breathing sound and like a throbbing sound. And he's finding himself drawn towards the refrigerator. And he looks down on the ground and he sees in front of the refrigerator, and it was kind of reminiscent of that part in 7 where you could see that there were marks on the floor that it could only be made by the refrigerator being moved. So it's kind of that type of thing. There's a track that shows that the refrigerator has been moved from side to side often. And he moves that refrigerator, and I'd have to say, it was another unique thing to this that I guess I would kind of ascribe to earlier stuff, like the 70s horror stuff. I love the postponement of gratification, and especially in scary stories, where they'll kind of hint at something and then they'll gloss over it, and you're just waiting for them to finally get to it, and they wait as long as they possibly can, and then finally they pull back the curtain. In this, I would say, the whole book is set up in months. So there's the prologue, which I didn't go into because I think that it's better if you don't know. And then month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, stuff like that. And as it becomes kind of obvious later, it's set up as if it was like the gestation period of a baby. So kind of clever, I thought. But I'd say that I think that this happens, if not in the first month, it's probably in just at the beginning of the second month when they go into the new house. And so you get going really soon on kind of like the thing upon which the whole story revolves around. And so he moves the refrigerator to the side, and on the wall, which we had just finished Stranger Things Season 1 in preparation. We're boning up on everything to watch Season 3. So the thing on the wall, it totally harkens to the gateway to the Upside Down in Stranger Things Season 1. There's this pulsating, black, mucusy chrysalis on the wall. And I think that he said that it was this big, let's say, I think he said it was like a 2-month baby or something. So it wasn't massive, but it was definitely this blot that you could see even in a low light down there in his phone. And there were like these veins running all over it, and it's just kind of like seeping this strange mucus stuff. And he's not repelled by it, which I think is very interesting. There's no repulsion, and then you kind of get locked in, and then you're moving towards it. Instantly, he's interested. So it almost makes me think that as soon as anyone even got into the house, if they moved anywhere towards the basement door, then they were instantly just like a tractor beam pulled towards this chrysalis. So it's handled very matter-of-factly. I think that's kind of what I would say about a lot of the wonders in this book. There are a lot of things that are handled really matter-of-factly, and I think that that kind of clicked a switch in my head where I'm like, people are taking this stuff really easily. So what the question is whether or not they are affected by the kind of like the pull of this thing's, I guess you call it charm, because what you find as the story goes along is Tom becomes obsessed with the chrysalis. However, the difference is he's constantly thinking about going to see it and going to touch it, because whenever he touches it, and this happens from the very first moment, as soon as he touches it, his entire world explodes. He sees, you know, I guess it's kind of like there's a lot of altered states, like the book, the Patty Chayefsky book, and later movie with William Hurt, which I totally recommend, Altered States. But there's a lot of that in this, where he kind of reaches out and touches this completely repulsive looking thing. But when he does, it's almost as if the universe kind of like pulls back and shoots forward, and he sees like the infinite, and he can see like sparks coming off of his hands, and all of his senses are insanely amplified. He can like hear the hair like growing on his body, and he can, you know, feel the breathing upstairs, and just like everything is just insanely almost like this orgasmic blast of electricity and just things that we can't even describe. So I hate to say it, but almost every moment in this book reminded me of something else. And this reminded me a whole lot of, if anyone's ever seen the movie Brain Damage, there's this like interplanetary slug that this guy comes across in his apartment building or something, and basically, if the guy feeds this slug human beings and stuff, it will pierce the back of his head and put this drug. It would like spray his brain with this stuff that it produces, and he's, you know, the guy ends up seeing the world in this kaleidoscopic trip and like wonderful feeling where, you know, I mean, that movie is like the epitome of, you know, addiction theme. So this is kind of like that, where he sees all this stuff and he just becomes the universe, and he's like smiling and like laughing uncontrollably, and then he just like throws up everywhere, and his just body's just like going into insane fits of sensory overload. So all this shit is happening in the basement. I can't help it. It really struck me as funny, because then of course the realtor and his wife come walking down, and he's already up in the kitchen, and they're like, "Hey, what do you think of it down there?" And he's like, "Oh, it's kind of full of stuff." And later on, his wife was like, "Did you just tell me? Did you smoke a joint down there?" Because when he comes up, like his eyes are all bloodshot, and he's kind of like, you know, euphoric and weird, and it's not a reaction that you think somebody would get from going into this musty basement of this obvious hoarder's house. And upstairs, they end up going into the attic, and there are these photographs of kind of like this cave, and you find out later that the lady who resided in the place earlier was an archaeologist, and she had retired, but she went on this kind of like this class trip. Hey, Jonathan, man, what's up? Jonathan Boughton, I hope I'm saying that right, from Juice in the Morning. I saw him. He is getting ready for his the ultimate battle with Juice for some sort of endurance test. I don't even know what it is, but
They're just running.
are they running like a 1K or something, or is it like a sprint?
I
Okay. Well, whatever they're doing,
Maybe it's
um,
Wiener Dash. I don't know.
I totally recommend going to Juice in the Morning's to their site and their Facebook page to check out the videos of them in the preparation for this massive contest. It's fantastic. But hey, thanks for that, man. I don't know. I love reading dictionaries and stuff. So anyway, um, but so they basically agree that the house is awesome and that, they'd be lucky to have it. So, as it goes along, the months aren't perfect. Like month 1, month 2, month 3. You'll have a jump in time where, I think it's useful. It is convenient, but there's lost time and there's lost experiences in there. And they end up kind of like revealing what's happened during that time, but I think it's kind of a convenience. But it's an allowed thing to get it done, to move along through the story and all that stuff. But I think that it kind of makes for this a lessening of the obsession, because you'll see him going about his daily life, and one of the things that being in contact with the Chrysalis has done, for whatever reason, and being away from it has done, is it gives him the most outlandishly violent thoughts. He'll just be standing, and the omniscient narrator makes it interesting because he'll just be talking to someone, and then all of a sudden he'll see like a centipede like crawl out of Jenny's eye socket, like into her mouth, and then he'll just see himself like taking an axe and like chopping up everybody in the line at the coffee shop. It's like it's almost as if there's no impact to this stuff. It's just not like fluff or anything, but it almost, like he says, or like the narrator basically says, Tom saw the man's scalp open up and his brain slither out onto his face and onto his chest. And he'll be like, Jenny looks at him and says, hey, we should get some more charcoal for the fire and have a cookout. And he just kind of says like, okay, dear. Like, it just doesn't, it almost seems, it's not thrown in there because some of the descriptions are really super chilling. It's almost as if there's no weight to it sometimes. You don't see a whole lot of reaction. And maybe it, that also comes from this acclimation to the Chrysalis, which happens over time. He'll, just being in its presence caused kind of like this euphoria and this crazed firing of everything in his brain. But then after a while, he actually has to like touch it in order to feel anything at all, and it starts to lessen and lessen. And he actually starts to seem to Jenny, he actually seems less frazzled out than he had been. Because at one point, when they thought nothing could get worse, then Jenny is at home, and I was kind of confused for a second. Only because I'm just not used to hearing the terms for it or whatever. I didn't think of it being called a stick. But, she's sitting in the bathroom with a stick, and she's talking about things or whatever, and you basically find out that the stick that she's referring to is a pregnancy test. So Jenny's pregnant, and because she, I guess it's one of those things where it's not because she's pregnant, it's just because of circumstance, but she ends up losing her job as this trainer. And it just so happens that Tom had found a new bar in town where one night he was feeling restless and he thought bloody centipedes were coming out of the ceiling or something, so that he just takes a walk and goes to this local watering hole. And it turns out that not only does he get along with the bartender, he resembles the bartender and bartendress's son and brother, who had died by an IED attack. And so he becomes fast friends with them and drinks with them all night and comes home plastered. And so he finds out that she's pregnant, and then instantly the questions start coming up about what he's going to do now, because Malcolm, who is the owner and bartender of Nick's bar, and Nick is the son that had perished. So it was kind of confusing at first, because Malcolm is the bartender and he's also the owner, and then he kind of puts his foot in his mouth and finds out who Nick was, because it's called Nick's bar. But it kind of comes to a head about his drinking, his smoking, and the fact that she doesn't have a job and someone has to get insurance. He can't just be freelancing at bars. Even if you don't have to commute, you have to find something to do with this baby. And so one of the characters that's introduced at the beginning in one of those kind of loud proclamations, the guy doesn't even show up yet. It's just kind of like I think it's like a phone call. Kevin, he comes to the rescue because he had always wanted his best friend to work for him and be this, this big sales Turk. So he says, well, it's time to get adult-like. And there's this, I don't know. I mean, I guess it seems strange to me that this guy's, he's not exactly a hippie or anything. He's an artist, he's a bartender, and he knows people, and he seems pretty no-nonsense. But there's this scene throughout all these horrific, terrifying thoughts that he's had in his head. He's standing in front of this salon, and he's just contemplating it, as if he was like walking the steps to the scaffold or something. He's like, oh man, corporate life. That means that these beautiful locks of hair and this, this grizzled beard that I have, they're going to have to go bye-bye. And it's not this like lament. He's almost like terrified. So he goes in there and he talks to the hairstylist lady, and they get it done. It seemed like way too dramatic for me when it comes to that. But maybe it's because, obviously my hair doesn't mean a whole lot to me. I'll totally I'm hot. It's hot outside, and I'll shave it off at a moment's notice. I don't care. And obviously I'm not the most stylish person that's ever walked down the pike. So I'll just kind of, I don't care. So then, he comes into the bar, and they don't recognize him. They're all freaking out, and he comes home, and of course she just starts laughing her ass off, because he's been this like Abercrombie and Fitch hipster model or whatever looking guy, and now he just looks like every other schlub. So after the kind of like the fallout from that, he ends up starting to smoke this job. He ends up being like better salesman than he ever could have possibly thought, could happen. And they have a dinner party, like much to his dismay. Like he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so everybody comes over, and of course Kevin's like the life of the party, and Victoria's having a great time, and all this stuff, and he just can't stand it. They're in the kitchen, and he can just feel the basement door just kind of like shrinking and swelling and undulating towards him, and needs him, and he needs it, and all this stuff. So I guess, there's not a good way of saying it other than using kind of like, movie terminology, but off camera, he's there, and then like he goes talk to someone else, and then that there's a passage of time, and all of a sudden he's back in the kitchen again, and you find out that he's gone to the basement, and in that time, like being in contact with this thing again, which you think that he was there like every day, he was going down every day, but it hasn't really been. It's only mentioned as if it may have happened. Like there aren't those pictures of kind of like him like worshiping it or clinging to it or whatever. He's actually kind of been half-ass fighting it like this whole time. But he goes down there, and he basically finds that this thing gives him, it like enhances his better qualities somehow. And maybe that's also kind of like the maybe I'm just not catching on to it because I'm not a smoker and I'm not a huge drinker and stuff like that. But Stephen King has said a lot that when he quit smoking, that he did research on what quitting smoking does to you, and apparently it lowers your intelligence, and it kind of puts you in a little bit of a fog. And smoking kind of gives you this boost to your intelligence and lowers a little bit of inhibitions and stuff like that. Just kind of like the things that kind of hang you up, and that's why people kind of do it for courage. They do it when they're nervous and all that kind of stuff or whatever. So when he comes back up, then he becomes the life of the party because he's gained this strange charisma and this this kind of like lust for life and this charm, which ends up kind of showing as I guess maybe with that blurb it said Cronenbergian. Maybe the Cronenbergian part, or Cronenberg-esque, I think they said. Maybe they're talking about the part in The Fly where like the nerd ends up having these, ends up getting these attributes of a fly, and due to change, he ends up stronger, he ends up faster, he picks up a woman at the bar, and he just becomes like what he thinks is a better version of himself when it's actually like eating him from within. But yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense because his sales go through the roof. There's since he's had to commute by bus for this job, the corporate job, there's been a little bit of kind of like a bully on the bus that's giving him shit, and at the expense of his dignity, he's kind of had to let it go. And over time, he ends up confronting this guy, and he just blasts him across the bus, and his strength has been enhanced, and he's a little bit quicker. He dodged. It was kind of like a spider sense thing. He anticipated a punch, and he was able to move effortlessly to get past it. And that's just not his. He's not a man's man. He's not an athlete in any kind of capacity. And actually, earlier in the book, it talks about how he hates killing things. That changes. So there are some abrupt blips and horrific changes that go along with this relationship. And I think it's, like I said, there is those little off-camera things that happen that I think are kind of a detriment to the story, because this whole like month 1, month 2, at the end of month 1, they'll be like sitting around talking, and everything's not necessarily hunky-dory. And then it'll say month 2, and it doesn't say like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It doesn't say June 15th, June 16th. It just says month 1, month 2. So in between month 1 and month 2, major changes have occurred. And it could be, a few days, it could be a few weeks, and it could be a few months, or a few, can't say a few months, but like 3 weeks could have gone by before they start talking again in this story. So big things occur, and you don't see them occur. And after I was done reading it, I was like, it really seemed that like this relationship has gone down the tubes really quick. And I honestly thought that I had missed something. But it turns out that, in between months, or at least like the letterhead or whatever you call it, like the breaks, the month breaks, chapter breaks, major stuff occurs. So all of a sudden, even though you really don't see him paying a whole lot of attention, I mean, he pays attention to the Chrysalis as he's going, he basically thinks about how he misses it, and he's thinking about it, and he wants to go back to it, and it's calling to him, and it's beckoning him, and he wants to go, but he just can't, and he's fighting it. And it hurts, and he's getting stupider, and all this kind of stuff. But he doesn't really do it. He has done it, but it's been off camera, which doesn't make it any less, true or anything like that. But I'm of the opinion that if you don't see it, And I guess if it doesn't happen and you don't see it, it's difficult to place a whole lot of importance to what's going on. So it takes some of the impact away from some of this stuff. And I think that the author may have tried to kind of lessen that by increasing kind of like the horrific consequences. So you find that his sales were like going through the roof, and it looked as if everything was going to be fine, and the baby was going to be protected, and their life was going to be secure. And out of the clear blue sky, she asked Victoria for more money, and then now she's going to open up her own exercise clinic in town. And it just all becomes kind of convenient, because if the sister is has animosity towards the brother-in-law, and the best friend has been bugging him to have the job, and he's at the job all the time, it just doesn't seem the stakes really start to dry up when there are all these kind of like safety nets and everything. And when you don't see the actual impact of the Chrysalis on everything, except for his thoughts, and then this gigantic burst of gore and craziness, it just seems like there's some stuff that's missing. So I don't know if the thought was, if everything would have been in there, then it just would have been this doorstop of a book. Well, there's something to be said for that, because there are doorstops that exist, and while I don't have a huge problem with them, a lot of times they tend to be really rich. Some people just don't have the patience for it, especially in like a kind of like an intimate relationship story like this basically is. The whole like Echo theme, the themes in Echo, you've got the addiction theme, and you got the theme of change, and you have the theme of birth. And I guess with does money really provide happiness? Does success make you a better person? Does your charm make you stronger? Like there's all kinds of stuff that occur in the book, but and it's not haphazard, but it's just kind of like almost like a too many cooks situation, or like a bunch of crazy ingredients that they stick out and they're noticeable to taste, but when you look at everything, it just something that isn't quite right. Doesn't make it any less entertaining, but it doesn't make it lasting. So the worst things in the world that could possibly happen, and they happen off screen. So you get to, I think it was like month 7, and he's been spending all of his time. All of a sudden, he's spending all of his time in the basement now. And he finds a squirrel in there, and I thought that the squirrel was going to be like a victim of the Chrysalis, but it turns out like a cat had gotten to it or whatever, which that'd be a hell of a battle. But he's all torn apart. And earlier, like I said earlier, she was talking about how he could never kill anything and all this stuff, when like basically there was an infestation of mice, and he dealt with it, but she never knew how, because he didn't like killing anything, and he was sick for weeks and all this kind of jazz. Well, so he finds some sweater that's laying around down there or whatever, and he wraps up the squirrel in it, which I don't know about you guys, but I worked in a vet, and squirrels are like lightning to begin with. So I would think even if it was all tore up, I doubt it would allow him to do this, but it lets him like wrap it up in this sweater. And he makes a beeline for the refrigerator, because he was going to put the refrigerator back in front of the Chrysalis, so just in case she came downstairs, she wouldn't see it. And so when he goes over to the refrigerator, he just kind of stops, and just because he ends up putting the squirrel up next to the thing, and instantly, like this ribbon of mucus just kind of like comes out like the blob and pulls the squirrel towards it, and it ends up getting engulfed. Well, it's weird to say engulfed, and it's weird to say kind of like closed in on or whatever, because it's almost like the squirrel's there and then it just starts to disappear, like piece by piece. So, of course, he's just like, oh my God, because like it isn't pretty. It isn't as if it just kind of phases out. It's kind of like crushed and crumbled, and it goes in there. So, he, in the past, like, his wife has tried to go downstairs and her leg went through the stair, and so there's kind of like there's a thought about whether or not this thing has been introduced to blood and likes it. So, but she didn't make it anywhere near it, so it's hard to say if the blood hit the ground and then it kind of like slithered some sort of tendril out and tasted it, and now it wants more or what. But basically, there's another secret about the house, and it has to do with the husband and wife, and it has to do with this obsession for the Chrysalis. So, since he spends all his time with the Chrysalis now, she's left him, and even though she's left him, and he's starting to look a wreck again. His hair's growing out. He's starting to get a beard. He's fucking up at work. Victoria has dinner with him and, says, oh, I was really starting to like you and you were doing... So it kind of like hammers home that thing where she didn't like him because she didn't trust him, and she didn't think that he would be, he wouldn't provide enough security for the wife. So she takes him out and she's kind of like, yeah, I was starting to like you, which is to say you were starting to make money, so now you mean something to me. It wasn't very subtle. And then she's like, but you guys are going to work this out. But if you don't, baby or no baby, you're going to have a problem with me. So it's like this kind of like domestic, the balance between the domestic stuff and the stuff that has to do with the Chrysalis, it's just strange. And, maybe because I can empathize with the situation, or sympathize with the situation in many ways. Maybe it's just too close to the situation. But for me to, find these little asides with the Chrysalis, to find them not wanting, it's hard to say. But over the course of all of this, he basically just starts feeding things to this Chrysalis. And so it just starts growing by leaps and bounds. And she's tired of it. Like, she's the clinic's going, and she just feels this emptiness without her husband. And I think that she's also seeing some effects from it, because at one point, and of course his name is Chad, right? With all the things that are going on now, who'd have thunk it? But this guy tries to assault her, and she just lays waste to this guy. So there's kind of like this idea that just from being in the house with it, as it starts to grow and be in this process of engulfing their lives, that she has reaped some of the benefits of the effects of it on everybody. So she's able to just like waste this guy. But in the process, she's like, something is happening. I've lost my husband. There's, what's happened in this house? Because her friend Andrea, who's a neighbor that they've met, it's kind of like the welcome wagon, came over one day and had seen that she went through the stairs, and basically tells her what happened in the house. So after kind of like all these things start falling apart, she goes on the search for the person who, or let's say the surviving member of the family that used to live in the house. And as she does this, then she sees what a lasting effect of the obsession can do. as she finds the I think it's called like apple weight or something. I wrote it down somewhere. It's neither here nor there, because when she gets there, what the hell? Gilchrist. It's the Gilchrists. She finds Mrs. Gilchrist in the psychiatric hospital, and basically she's kind of in this fugue state or whatever. And when when Jenny talks about the basement, all of a sudden everything just snaps back again, and this lady is like totally mine. It's this obsession for the basement and what was in there. And so it's crazy. So it's almost like these weird peaks and valleys of exposition and like this relationship stuff, and hitting you over the head with these obvious themes that they just kind of drop. And then kind of like I guess the theme that should have been more obvious the whole way through, especially when you designate things as months and you split it up into 9 pieces. There is a birth that occurs. It's kind of reminiscent of The Mist. And I don't want to say too much more than that. But you kind of, or I guess, and also like The Thing. Because it makes it sound as if the Chrysalis needed elements. Because when you think of like a chrysalid, and you think about like this insectile thing that happens where they go into this chamber, and then while they're in there, everything just gets scrambled. And when it emerges, it's not even the same creature that was when it entered. So when you think of this chrysalis thing, at one point when you saw it, it was just kind of like this bulb on the wall. But over time, it's strengthened and strengthened and strengthened, and he's fed it, and it's changed him, and it's given him things, and it's taken pieces of him. So when the chrysalis finally gives forth its offspring, it's pretty fucking wild, I have to say. Pardon that, but it's pretty fucking wild. And it's one of those things where the payoff is pretty spectacular to the whole story. But I guess if you have appetizers and you have an entire meal and you have drinks and it's just kind of good enough, it had everything that it needed, but it was just kind of good enough. And then the dessert's fantastic. Do you remember the meal? Or do you remember the dessert? So it's like, maybe this isn't a book where maybe this isn't a book that stands up well to the test of analysis. It's hard to say. And it's the beginning. It's the beginning of Brendan Daneen. But the biggest echo that I mentioned at the top of the show was no, Jennifer, I won't tell. The Cipher by Kathy Koja. It's so natural. When you read this book, all I could think of throughout the whole thing was The Cipher by Kathy Koja. And it did it so much better. That book is just a unbelievably rich, creepy masterpiece. And it's kind of hard to find. I'm not exactly sure why. because she's still out there. She's actually doing a lot of activism, and she's doing a lot of, I think, performance art. She actually released one of her books. You can't read her. Jennifer can't read her. Oh, that I must have. I can't remember if I suggest or if I recommended her to you or not. I bet I probably must have, even if you knew her or not. But I love her work so much. I mean, there's a really iconoclastic way that she goes about the art of writing that I think sometimes I don't even know what she's responding to. I don't know what you're saying nope to. Which question, which answer? I'm not sure. Because I think that there's a stream of consciousness that goes along with her, as with kind of like the earlier Bret Easton Ellis stuff. It is of a time. Well, see, like I said, with kind of like the strange stream of consciousness type of writing, I think that the complexity and the sophistication of the stuff that Jennifer normally likes to read, I think that this is so different, and in some ways it's so much more simplistic. In some ways it's a lot more, I guess, sensual is the only other way I could put it, but not in kind of like this lyrical, flowery way. It's almost like the sense of, you strike your elbow on the wall and you slip in your own sweat. That type of thing. But I found the cipher, it all came back to me as soon as I was reading this, because it's about a couple that were in an apartment building, just like they were. And they go into the, I think it's just kind of like the janitor's closet. And there's this hole there. And the hole doesn't have edges like it was carved into the ground. It's almost like a pore. It's like rounded as if it was like an organic thing. And things get lowered into it and things come out of it that aren't quite the same. And there's this obsession with staying near it and what it gives to you and the change that occurs. And it just seemed like a pared down, much more efficient and much more effective version of this, because there's no doubt as to the themes, which there are a lot of the same ones in the Chrysalis, but for whatever reason, they're just haphazard. I guess not haphazard. They just kind of stutter, where it'll be so clear, and then all of a sudden something will happen that'll kind of like either push it to the side or kind of like denounce its importance in lieu of something else that also fizzles away. So there's potential, especially since it almost seems to me that this story would have been just fine if they just would have kind of run with the alcoholism, or just like the upheaving of their lives. Like it would have worked just fine with that, because as it is, the Chrysalis, unfortunately, because when Daneen describes like the effects of what it does to your mind, what it does to your body, the longing for it, and the different things that you get from it, and how it feels to kind of be enhanced, but then at the same time, it's like any drug. You'll get some sort of enhancement, but it's at the detriment of your life. So like there's kind of like that there, but at the same time, it just doesn't stick anything that I could really see. And it's not as if I was disappointed in the story. I wasn't disappointed in the characters or the way everything played out. But for whatever reason, there were a lot of connections that just kind of dropped that didn't allow me to have a lasting thought of it once it was all over. Which that doesn't happen all the time. And it might just be that, like I said, it's so familiar to me now that anything that kind of cheapens the impact, it's gonna go against my enjoyment. So there are a lot of people who have enjoyed it, and that, like I said, it may just not hold up. It may just not Metro Lovecraft. Yeah, I can see that. With the cipher, that is. With this, yeah, people were going on about like the concept of the birth, the gestation and the birth. I think it's just a byproduct. I think that's just kind of like I think it's just kind of an assumed thing. Because she's like, if there had been some sort of connection with the way that she was reacting to her own changes, if there had been anything that had to do with her kind of feeling this sort of like transformation, this metamorphosis inside of herself or whatever, but there was none of that. It seems like no matter how much he tried to switch between the characters, it ends up being less than, six, it just, I don't know. It just wasn't quite there. It wasn't bad. This isn't a book that, I'm actually kind of curious to maybe read it again and go into it like, I'm going to read this as if I wasn't trying to, not that I go into anything trying to pick it apart. Mostly, a lot of times, it's just kind of like an intuitive thing and it's an organic thing. And with this, it really seems, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe that was part of it. With most things, I can kind of intuit or organically, I know just by like going through it and reading it, like everything comes into view. Everything is in not sharp focus, but it's just like this, understanding. And maybe because I really had to go through this trying to piece together what he was trying to get across with this. And I found a bunch of stuff, and it just, none of it seemed to hit home, or none of it seemed to fit into place. It was all there. It was all laying across the surface, but the square pegs didn't go into the square holes. They were just all laying around there. So, and I don't normally kind of like, everything's relative, and everyone's different, and no matter who you are or what you're critiquing, or, I try not to call these reviews when I'm going through these things. But when something doesn't ring true, or when something doesn't quite hit the mark, I can't say that it does for me, but it's all for me. It's anyone else could read this, and just like with Jennifer's, when she's talking about Cathay, or I keep saying, I say Cathay Koya for years, just because I didn't want to assume it's like Kathy, but I recently became friends with her on Facebook, and I saw some videos where she was speaking and stuff, and it's Kathy. So Kathy Koja, Jennifer didn't like her, didn't get that feel for her. And in fact, it looks like she kind of doesn't like her. So anything's possible. You could totally read the Chrysalis and get a different reaction. But I'd have to say that I disagree with almost every blurb on the back of it. It says, Bracken McLeod, author of Stranded. Stranded. I bet it's not the same thing, though. You say, hatches all the darkest fears of having one on the way. I disagree with that, because if he's talking about, or if they, I don't know, who knows what it is. If you're talking about kind of like all the difficulties with getting your finances straight, and just like the fear of whether you're going to do a good job, or the changes to your body, or the pain, or anything like that. Yeah, sure, right? Any novel that has anything to do with pregnancy is going to put that across. But I don't think that's what they're saying. I think they're saying that somehow the Chrysalis is supposed to show you like the darkest parts of the process, and I don't think so. Like that doesn't hold for me. Yeah, not our Kool-Aid. So it's as simple as that. Like, however, I think hardback versus softback books, I think that's a definite relationship. Turns the old haunted house trope on its ear. I think that it almost seems as if they were just trying to come up with a clever thing to say on the back that just slightly, vaguely has to do with the story. If you liked Amityville Horror and the heart-shaped box, you love the Chrysalis. What? I don't think it has anything to do. I mean, yeah, there was a couple I had to go through some bullshit. Yeah. I mean, it's so vague. Yeah. Welcome to the dark side of suburbia. For fans of 10 Clover... Yeah, it's just... It makes me wonder sometimes if everyone's just like, well, there was a house in it, so fans of Amityville Horror or fans of Haunting at Hill House, it's like, no. I mean, this guy is definitely haunted by something, but it's not a dread. He's in the throes of this addiction to the effects that he has, from, I guess you'd say, I'm almost tempted to say caring for it, but that's not what it is. Like, if that was it, then that would kind of make sense with the whole motherhood, fatherhood thing. But he doesn't care for it. He lusts for it. So, like, that doesn't hold with that at all. I am shamefully behind on my Joe Hill reading. I'm not so sure I've read anything by Joe Hill yet. And maybe it's that weird, I'm not going to say animosity towards Stephen King, but I guess that he's just such an institution that I think I have all the time in the world to read that guy. I could go my entire life and spend the last 10 years of my life reading that guy because it's still going to be there. And maybe that's part of what it is. And I just, kind of ascribe Joe Hill to that, which is wrong. He's done all of his own things. And as far as I can tell, he's done things that harken back to his dad. Maybe, just kind of like intrinsically or whatever. Yeah, Jennifer. Yes. Couldn't agree more. Yes. I think that this, and maybe, well, she's saying you can't see this stuff in the future, but she's basically saying it would have been better treated as a short story of a novel or a novelette. I agree. I think that if you had shrunk everything down so that you would have had to have had a better balance between the relationship and the obsession, I think that it could have worked out fine. Yeah, Joe Hill is different from Stephen King, but I think that you'd be remiss if you said that there weren't a lot of similarities between their work. There just is. Or there just are. So, would that have saved this? Was this supposed to be a comic issue rather than an entire book? And, it just, who knows? Because it does seem to be that, like, there's a full story there. But I'm tempted to say unbalanced, but I don't think I can really say that either. Because then you'd have to say, well, one's more important than the other one. And that's not quite true either. It's just like, it's almost as if there are 3 books here, and instead of, like, all of them walking in single file, they're walking next to each other instead. It's like really it just doesn't coalesce. It just doesn't mix together. So, does that make it a failure? I don't think so. And it doesn't put me off to it because I was engaged in their lives. It really struck home to me. But I almost think that with the more fantastical aspects of it, they intruded so lackadaisically in some points that it was difficult. Like, sometimes I forgot it was there. You could have almost said the Chrysalis was his car for as much as it came into play. Until the end, of course. But, the last 2 months are corkers in this book. But who knows? I mean, maybe this show kind of like holds up a magnifying glass to things that would be better off just purely enjoyed. Not to say that I don't enjoy things. I mean, I try to have things on here that I enjoy. I gush over a lot of things. In fact, every once in a great while, I wonder sometimes if people think that I'm maybe a little too positive to be a truly well-rounded whatever the hell you call what I'm doing. But every once in a great while, I'm taken by surprise. Creepers. Never going to forget that shit. Yeah, I said it's a caca. You okay with that, Jennifer? I hope you are. I don't care. Man, everybody's noticing my vocabulary tonight. Ragging on me. I say neato, too. Is that a problem? Yeah. Melanie doesn't like me saying neo sometimes. But what are you going to do? Anyway, the Chrysalis. Give me a book hand for a second if you can. The Chrysalis by Brendan Daneen.
You're gonna have to give me more than that.
Whoop. Wait, me warning?
Yeah, I have that at the camera right now.
It's okay. They can see it. The Chrysalis, give it a shot. Huh?
You can put it up now.
Okay. Give it a shot, see what you think. I would actually I would like to have that happen a little more often. Let me know. Maybe try it out. Damn. I need more Wawa juice tonight. Try it out, see what you think. Feel free to get back to me at Diabolical Index on Facebook. Or if you want, go to pagesoftheuncanny@gmail.com. I just recently set that up. So, if you want to, check it out. Let me know what you think. But please be specific. I'm not a gigantic fan of someone disagreeing with me because they just say, because. The internet seems to be bad for that lately. But if all of that kind of seemed like a downer, hopefully it didn't. I mean, like I said, it's not bad. It wasn't as great as I would have liked. But something pretty awesome did happen this weekend. Well, she's probably not listening anyway, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to put it out there. Who cares? There are times, in relationships where you wonder, is the person, are they just kind of put it, what are you talking about? Hey, that place is going to rise from, like the Phoenix. Don't you worry. It's just taking a while. Like I said, just like in the book, we had to move in a hurry. And Paradox City just ended up being the depository for all of our crap. So it's a lot. So we got to get that straightened out. And then it'll be all hunky-dory. But you never know in relationships most of the time if someone is just kind of putting up with your weirdness, or if they if they really do see it as a part of you and they enjoy it and stuff. And this weekend, I haven't been doing it for a long time. I don't want it to come off like I have. But basically, like in the last, I'd say 6-8 months, something like that, I've started playing Dungeons and Dragons with a pretty staunch crew regularly, and for whatever reason, our dungeon master couldn't come in for a couple of months. So anyone who knows that once someone does get into whether it is tabletop games or RPGs or what have you, it seems like once they get into it, they're either kind of a lackadaisical person to do it, or they totally jump in with both feet and get completely obsessed, and it like rules all of their everything. Well, these guys couldn't wait, so they ended up forming a new campaign this last weekend. Kind of like, I tried to be the diplomat and make sure that everybody was like, there was total transparency with the other DM to make sure that he didn't, accidentally bust in and see that we were playing it. It may have caused a row. Like, I have no idea. It may have hurt feelings. Whoever. I totally prefer, anyone knows me knows, I prefer for there to be complete transparency and no bullshit, because it just leads to drama. Don't like it. So everything was great, and I was going to be just kind of like a spectator. And then I went there to spectate, and they had everything all laid out, and they were going to roll up a new character for me, because this is going to be a completely new thing and maybe even a one-off. It went so well that it's probably not going to be a one-off one. But so I get a new character and stuff, and it's really strange having a secondary character in a secondary game. But it just worked out that I wasn't sure if I was going to be available. That's why I kind of wanted to be a spectator. And this is totally off topic, but I just kind of wanted to end on a cool note that might give everybody hope out there. If you wonder whether or not the person that's in love with you is really in support of what you do and stuff. So basically, I didn't know what we were doing last weekend. Sometimes when you're in a relationship, especially when there comes like when there are kids involved, you may not know what everything that's happening over the weekend. So I got with Mel and I was like, hey, what are we doing? And she said, well, not a whole lot, and da. So I was kind of like, hey, I was going to be a spectator, but they set all this stuff up, and then, I don't know, I'm kind of feeling the urge. So I was kind of like, there isn't any way that you want to play too, would you? And she responded kind of differently than I would have expected. And it was by text, so who's to say? So she was like, ooh, I don't know, let's see. And I was like, hey, come on over, we'll see what happens. Well, trying to make a long story short, but basically, not only did she have an awesome time, she totally fell into it. She totally jumped in with both feet and had become like the VIP of all the battles. She kicked some serious ass. Had a great time while doing it. And last thing she talked about before we went to bed that night, first thing she talked about in the morning, she was looking up dice online. She wanted the monster manuals and shit. And I was like, oh man, I never would have guessed. Not to say, because she loves playing games and stuff. But I guess I just didn't expect for her to jump in with both feet like she had. Okay, so that happened. And I think I've said before that she's not a gigantic fan of horror for whatever reason. And of course I am. So we see Far From Home again, second time on Sunday. Totally go see Far From Home, by the way. It's much more surprising than you ever would have thought possible. It really rounds out phase 3 a lot better than I would have expected, and it's very, very surprising. So we get home from that, and it's getting a little bit late, and she prizes sleep above all things, basically. So I was like, we watched. Again, I think I mentioned that we were watching Stranger Things. So we watched Stranger Things. We ended up the season 1, and so it was late for some people. Not for me. I'm a damn insomniac. But But it was like midnight or something, like the witching hour. And I hadn't seen Hereditary yet. And I just picked it up last weekend. 2 weekends ago. So I was like, you want to watch Hereditary? And this is midnight. She prizes sleep above all things, and she doesn't like horror. Okay? Whether or not this is a byproduct of her getting down with the D&D, I have no idea. She watched Hereditary with me late night, right before she had to get up for a day of work on Monday. And after it was all over with, I'm going to need a second viewing on Hereditary. There is a lot to unpack in that movie. What I do say, though, it was definitely an example of a blurb actually working. There was a blurb on that said, The Exorcist for the 21st century. And as we were going through it, I was kind of thinking, I'm not quite so sure. Now, that was because I was operating from when you see The Exorcist, chances are you've heard of The Exorcist. And chances are you know a lot about The Exorcist already before you've seen it. Hopefully you've already seen it. But if not, it's going to be great for you to see it for the first time. But with this, I tried my best not to know anything about it. I had seen a bunch of memes. I didn't understand them. After I saw it, I understood them. But, so we ended up watching it. And after it was all over, because I've kind of like conned her into watch stuff before that maybe I shouldn't have. Because usually I try to curate everything so it would be something I think she would like. But sometimes I just get a wild hair and I was like, okay, Return of the Living Dead Part 2, whatever, I don't know. And who knows? She either goes to sleep in the middle of it or tries to get out of it in some kind of way, or it affects her badly and what have you. With this, she just kind of looked at me at the end, was just kind of like, that was fucking creepy. And she was like, if I have nightmares, I'm kicking you. Just kind of like playfully like, and she went to bed and no ill effects, no nightmares. Got up the next day, everything was all hunky-dory. So I was like, is this the beginning of a new era? Like, it honestly made me think. I was like, maybe she just kind of had this disdain for it, and maybe she thought she didn't have it. She didn't have a liking, or she didn't have a whatever, and she couldn't quite understand why I would be into something like that, and it didn't really resonate with her and stuff. So now I'm wondering, because I do Dungeons and Dragons probably every other Saturday. It depends. Like, it doesn't always work out that way, but I do it pretty regularly. Now, this is kind of like the first campaign that I tried once a long time ago, and
you guys play 5e or?
Yeah, 5e. They all those guys kind of seem to act as if nothing else matters. So
It's better.
Okay. Yeah, so, that's the way like I said, to say that I'm anything but a extreme beginner, it would be silly. I'm still an extreme beginner. And luckily, I managed to come up with a third option. I'm not indifferent, and I'm not obsessive. I'm interested. Like, I bought one set of dice, and I got them at a discount. And I'm interested, but I haven't bought the manuals. And I get into the game, but I don't think about it much afterwards. So it's like, maybe it's just because I've got so much stuff going. But I just wanted to close tonight by saying, you may think that someone you care about isn't into your stuff, or they talk shit about it, or they don't have a lot of respect for it, or what have you. It might just be because they haven't been exposed to it yet, in whatever way. And you might expose them to it and they still don't give a shit. However, you just never know. It just might be one of those things where they don't think they're going to like it, and they don't think that it's going to work for them, and they don't think they'd be jazzed about it. But if you can set up the right circumstances, They might just get a feel for what you're into, and it might make you guys closer. It might connect you guys even more than you thought that you could have been connected. For me, I felt like it was a major victory. It was awesome. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you just want the person to be happy. So you don't want to force them to, to watch something and they don't like it. And then that might mean they never end up watching anything. And so, it's great if you can at least allow them to attempt to see it the way you do. And in this case, I think it worked. I'm probably going to allow for a little bit of breathing room before, because I mean, Hereditary, that's kind of a biggie right now. Like, that's one of the major I think it's one of the major ones that's on everybody's list right now. Especially since like that Midsummer came out, and it's the same Ari Aster, I think, was the director of that too. And that interests the hell out of me because apparently it all takes place in the sunlight. Like, there aren't a whole lot of shadows going on. That it's all about like everything being out in the open in the sun, bright sunlight and color. So I think that we really are in a renaissance right now. I think that everybody's looking for a new way of looking at an old subject, and maybe come at it from a different sensibility of the 21st century and things like that. So, who knows? Who knows what'll happen? I know there's a lot of good stuff out there right now, and I honestly can't say for sure if there is such a push for it quite in like the literature aspect or not. I know that there are a lot of great people putting out a lot of great stuff. I'm just not sure if it's quite caught up with the movies and the comics. The comic book horror stuff is just, it's at a level of quality that, I mean, I thought that it got to a level in the 70s and stuff, and even before that, before the Seduction of the Innocent and the Comics Code and all that kind of stuff, it is at a insane level of quality right now. So, with any luck, hopefully, books at large, hopefully it reaches the same level. Because as far as I can tell, once the 90s hit, the horror fiction thing, it kind of got whittled down to the old standbys, and I would like to think that there's a new generation that's coming out and is going to make it their own. And now that I'm really getting in, kind of entrenched in the indie horror stuff with the filmmakers, and with meeting Betty Rocksteady and a few other writers that I've met, either within, kind of like her extended sphere, and people that I've known, and Nate Southard and stuff like that. It seems like they're all connected in one way or another. I'm finding that out pretty readily. So I hope that on the horizon that horror literature is going to bloom the way that the other things have. So here's hoping. But that's kind of a hopeful thing. I think that I think there's room for it. I think that there's a lot of, especially if you look at the past, some of the greatest horror icons and horror leaps. Not to say that all I care about is horror. I mean, I'm interested in sci-fi, and I'm interested in everything, really. Especially when it comes down to like why classify. You can totally have something that just goes on in an old folks' home. You can have like the everyday lives of people in an old folks' home, and that could be the most horrific movie or book or story that you could ever hope for. So I hope it comes back around. And I'll just leave you with that. Definitely make sure that you you attempt to turn on the people in your lives to what you're into, and you might hit pay dirt, and they end up brightening it for you even further than it was before. So anyway, beware your human heart. That's the Diabolical Index for July 8th, 2019. For some reason, I'm still tempted to say June. But July 8th, 2019, where the pages of the uncanny reside. From Moreland Manor, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm hoping I wasn't too harsh, but I think that always comes from a place of honesty. And I'd have to say, if I'm to be honest, everybody is taking over the keep it something-y. Have you noticed that? I'm seeing it every day. Ever since I started saying keep it squirrely, now I'm seeing everybody do that same type of thing. So I'm starting to think that it's time to put it to bed. Come up with something new. I've seen keep it creepy. I've seen keep it...
That's been that was way long.
But I'm just seeing it more now.
Oh.
And I'm seeing keep it... shit.
They keep it creepy.
Keep it snappy. Keep it... I'm just seeing it. I'm seeing it everywhere. So I may have to put it to bed. But until then, until I come up with something better, or
I think Amonkai was the first one to say it, wasn't he?
I think I definitely think Mark was.
Yeah.
And I've talked to them, by the way. And Amonkai is not off the books quite yet. They're not off the books quite yet. So they've been away for a while, and like I said before, I thought for sure they were going to come back during King of the Monsters, but who knows? You never know what's going to happen to Magic Squirrel. So there you go. Thanks for tuning in. Read the Chrysalis. Get back to me at Diabolical Index Facebook page or pages of the uncanny at gmail.com. And hey, keep it squirrely. I just haven't got anything else right now. Am I still on? I am?
was magic.